In this episode of The Story Detective, we're going to take a deeper dive into how environment and setting can affect your characters. We're also going to look at how week 2 of Nanowrimo affected me and the progress of this month, and not for the better. That's what's coming up on today's episode. Stick around. If you like this video, remember to subscribe, like, share, all that good stuff. I'm wearing another sweater this week because Very Bad Books told me I should film all of my videos in a fluffy sweater. Not really. It's freezing. This week we had temperatures that it was like winter fell out of the sky. We actually had warmer days last winter, and last winter was pretty brutal here. But it's cold. It's very cold. Let me start off by saying after last week's video and my day 7 challenge, day 8 and 9, I got a total of 30 words between those 2 days. We'll get into that in a few minutes. For now, we're going to look at day 10. Day 10 was the day that I was supposed to take a day off. And after having a couple of lousy days, I debated whether or not I should take the day off. But I decided to anyway. It's day 10 of NaNoWriMo, and I'm taking a little time off. And I'm on a bit of an excursion today. We talked in the last video about small towns and subcultures and communities. I'm heading to the town that my parents lived when I was growing up. And it's part of the setting for the story I'm working on for NaNoWriMo, so I figured this could recharge my creative juices and give me a little food for thought. It's kind of an overcast, gloomy day, definitely a BYOT kind of day. Bring your own tea. We are taking day 10 of NaNoWriMo on the run. There's some beautiful country in Orange County, New York. In passing, the casual observer would never suspect the entire county was being run by aliens, or that their ships are cleverly disguised as school buses. They say we can't go home, and yet, for our characters and for ourselves, it's where everything began. The childhood fantasies that culminated into who we are and who we want to be. Also, our deepest fears and anxieties. It all begins where we began. And that's what we talked about in the last video. Certainly coming here brings up memories and thoughts and feelings. Good for writers to return and get down to earth with their origins, and also remember the childhood stuff, because what I'm writing is a bit Stephen King-esque, and he remembers that stuff very well. And certainly this town is a little bit Stephen King-esque. I think all small towns are to some degree. There's certainly some characteristics here. When I was growing up, I was a Stephen King fan. So maybe thinking in terms of how Stephen King portrayed his characters in a small town, you can't help but see it. But also, that's part of who I am, and that's part of what I'm writing about. So let's go on a little adventure and see what we can find out, see what memories awaken. Week 2 for my writing buddies has been a little bit hit and miss as well. Some people have carried on without pause. A couple of us have stumbled over the pressure that we put on ourselves last week, and I fell right into the trap that I said I wanted to avoid, where just take it easy, have fun, get your word count in, pace yourself. Since I didn't have my characters as well thought out as I should have, I came at week 1 with a flurry of words trying to figure things out. I wrote on pure adrenaline. Then, just like any other race, you use all that gas early, and then suddenly you start to run out of gas. When we think about TV and movies, there's a lot of people from big cities. But when you get real about it, New York City is a very small portion of New York State. Most of it is small towns, mountains, trees. It's very countrified. In fact, most of it used to be dairy country, and that's the area that we're in. When I was growing up here, it was mostly farms, dairy farms, nothing anywhere. So people had nothing to do. They took their own sweet time getting from one place to another. There is a lot of history. A couple of houses down from my parents' house is a big house on the corner that used to be a stagecoach stop. And the people that had the home were like descendants of the original owners that had the place. So you would think that they would be anxious to share their family history, but No. The only thing they shared is if, as kids, we played too close to their lawn, then we'd hear about where the property boundaries were. There was the other guy behind my parents. He said he owned all of that property, and by 2012 it was all going to revert back to him, and he couldn't wait to kick the whole bunch of us off his property. So can you use that for small town people? Now think about that in terms of years later. I'm somewhere in my teens and people from the city are moving here. It's a beeline from New York City on Route 17 to Middletown. People came out here horseback riding and fishing on the weekends. It was like a little vacation spot. So it makes sense that they would eventually come out here because it was cheaper than the city. When that started happening and they started building up, you know what people drive like in Manhattan, and then you get the people that are slow going the speed limit, doing 30 miles an hour on country roads, and people want to run one another over. Suddenly we have road rage. So it's an area that's very rife with conflict. There's a line in Stephen King's Salem's Lot where he talks about or poses the question of whether a town can be inherently evil. I don't think a town can be inherently evil unless you're writing a horror story. I do think, however, family ghosts can be passed on. And they're passed on in the same way that people pass on biases and prejudices anywhere else. Does that create a public opinion or a community consensus that's passed along? Yes, I think in that case, it really does. And on a larger scale, isn't that what we do in almost every culture and globally? We're continually passing things on that the human race would be much better if we laid it down and forgot about it. Okay, this is going to be my update for the last couple of days that I didn't film since my day off on Sunday. Day 11, I got 2,321 words. That was a pretty good day. Yesterday, not so great. 1,590. Overall, I'm not doing badly because of the big start that I got last week, and I'm glad I had that start, but also this week has been scattered. My phone blew up. Not an explosion, but the battery swelled up in it and the whole thing started exploding, so I don't have my phone to film the little updates like I was doing to show the screen on my Nano count, so my phone should be repaired by tomorrow, I hope. Moving forward from there, I am going to hit the 25K probably realistically tomorrow. I could hit it today, but I'm going to try to get my 2,000 words in and then get on with some editing. Other than that, I'm on point. I'm a little bit ahead of the curve, and that's right about where I should be at the end of this week. And I'm heading into a live stream in like 12 minutes with Lisa Daly, so moving right along. I will talk to you guys later. Let's take the Stephen King approach. What about superstition? Small towns, people that have lived there their entire existence, they don't travel a lot. They come up with the craziest ideas that they make up their own superstitious beliefs. And I've heard enough to know that anything that you can make up in terms of bad luck and an end result and put together in your head, probably somebody's already made it up, right? He agrees. Superstition is also a way for your characters to keep people away from those closets where skeletons might be buried. Think about the Scooby-Doo mysteries, how the bad guys are always trying to scare people away from whatever they're trying to hide. And your characters, on a more subtle level, just like in real life, may be trying to come up with their own myths around areas of life that they may feel a bit sensitive or insecure about. Even flaws can be masked or presented in another way. Often characters aren't aware of their flaws, and if they are, they try to cover it up with a lot of bluster or a lot of ego. And that's something also to consider when you think about how your character camouflages flaws, or how your character might be trying to keep people at arm's length. Especially for villains, they do that all the time. So does your hero. If they were perfect, they wouldn't have anything to overcome, right? Check this out. Oscar's house. Speaking of not traveling beyond the confines of your small town, once I ended up in this small town in England called Wakefield, and we were planning to go to Leeds, which was about 15 minutes down the road. And I was talking to these people. They had never been to Leeds. 15 minutes away, they never visited. And when asked why, they said, they have nothing that we don't have right here. So, small town confinement, it does become a bubble community quite often. There's nothing at all that's not menacing about this. Small town nutcrackers, deadly with their hatchets. So then you have to consider, does your character live in a time before the internet? Because then those areas are really isolated. And if it's after the internet, then they have their phones, and you have to think about technology and how the problems of the world might invade on your character. Technology opens us up to a lot of things and also closes us down at the same time, because while it opens some people up, I'm sure you've all seen people sitting on their cell phones and talking in public about personal, private things. I was in a store one time and a guy comes up to me and he's arguing with his girlfriend. I mean, at length, and it was kind of rude and nasty too. And then when he's done, he shuts off his phone and he says, "I'm sorry you had to hear that." But the question is, was he sorry? If he didn't want me to hear it, he could have went anywhere in the store, but he didn't. He made sure he stayed right next to me because somehow he got something out of that. And how does that characterize him? Small towns often don't like outsiders. They fear them. And in a broader sense, that can translate into fearing going outside of their own boundaries as well, where they feel like they have a certain amount of control. Characters, again, just like real life, can become very used to that environment, very used to what they're used to. People don't know what they don't know, and neither does your character. They could be completely wrong about something and yet be talking about it with such conviction. They want to prove that they're right. They want people to accept what they're saying. Technology brings the outside world into any environment, but even there are biases. There can be media biases. There can be biases from politicians. But people that's trapped in that bubble world, or small town to small town, we have a fear factor that develops from all that. So this is my update from day 13. That was my total at the end of yesterday. I'm now on day 14. I got my phone back so I can do these little handheld updates, which is great. We don't realize how dependent we are on these things until we have to give them up. I was a day and a half without my phone and I felt totally handicapped. So just for the heck of it, I went around and I randomly asked some people here, people that worked here. I don't want to get them on camera because you don't want to get somebody fired or in trouble, but I had a multiple choice question. Writers can't be afraid to ask these things. So I asked them, in terms of Middletown, would they describe it as A, a country paradise, B, creepy-ass Stephen King town, or C, once you've seen one small town, you've seen them all? Basically, the top answer was, it's not changed from the time that I was here. Middletown has expanded and gotten bigger in the town itself, but the surrounding areas, they agreed, was creepy as hell and very Stephen King, and that it was still rife with conflict because the city people and the country people were still feuding. The amount of violence and crime had still gone up. So the number one answer, creepy Stephen King area. We will even pass on problems like that and call them traditions. In small communities, it looks like you're fighting for a tradition that's really somebody's problem, and they've passed it on because somebody did them wrong. Because the human race is great at borrowing problems. We've done it ever since the dawn of man. Because there's always someone fanning the flames. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope it's added something to your Nanowrimo or given you some food for thought. And I will see you next week when this crazy adventure continues into the third quarter.